This week, we're resharing one of our favorite episodes of the Single Tracks podcast. If you've already heard this one, don't worry, because we'll be back next week with an all-new show. Single Tracks is psyched that Jamis Bikes has come on as a supporter of the podcast and is also a supporter of the website. Jamis has been designing and building quality bikes since 1979, and they were among the first to produce mountain bikes beginning in 1982. The brand has brought the world some iconic and award-winning mountain bikes over the past 40 or so years, and the Dragon has been the soul of the brand for decades. Introduced in 1993, the Jamis Dragon Hardtail delivers the feel that only comes with high-quality steel, and it's done so for nearly 30 years running. The newer Jamis Portal and Hardline full suspension bikes feature the innovative and race-proven 3VO suspension platform, built into both carbon and aluminum frame options. You can check out this year's all-new Dragon and 3VO bikes, along with the entire lineup of Jamis high-performance mountain bikes at jamisbikes.com. That's jamisbikes.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Gene Hamilton. Gene is a former pro downhill racer who created one of the first mountain bike skills courses in the late 1990s. Today, Better Ride hosts clinics all around the U.S. teaching regular riders and pros alike how to ride faster. Thanks for joining us, Gene.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into mountain bike racing?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. So I was a professional, or trying to be a professional snowboard racer. I mean, I basically, like a lot of professional mountain bikers, like me when I was a professional mountain biker, I quote was a professional, but I wasn't getting paid,
Right.
you know.
That was all you did, so that made you a pro,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
I
And
might call it a ski
competed.
bum or a snowboard bum.
Well, and and I did well in competitions, but they didn't pay enough to pay the rent, you know.
Right.
So got my first mountain bike in 1989, and then I think it was the summer of 1992, my mountain bike was getting dated. Suspension had come out, you know, and the front suspension had come out, and there were some cool things that I wanted. And I happened to be at the grocery store, at this little grocery store, Ideal Market in Boulder, Colorado, and there was a bike shop next door, and the KHS rep was in there talking to the owner. And when he walked out, I go, "Hey, dude," you know, it was like, "How do I get a sponsorship or something like that?" You know?
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, I laid it down. You know, I'm a pro mountain bike, a pro snowboarder, and you know, I want a bike at a discount, you know, because I'm arrogant and a jerk, you know, I guess. So anyway, he said, "Oh, you know," he goes, "Do you live here?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm about to move to San Diego." And he said, "Well, when you get to San Diego, find a KHS dealer and ask them about the farm team. We'll give you a bike for wholesale. And then if you do 5 races, we'll give you another 10% back." I'm like, wow. Sweet. You know, I knew nothing about mountain bike racing, but I just wanted a deal on a bike, and I figured I'll do a couple races. It'll be good training for snowboarding probably.
Yeah.
So I moved to San Diego to work for a friend of mine, and I went to the local KHS dealer, a really nice older man, and asked him to be on the team. And he said, "That sounds great." And he said, "I hadn't
seen you biking or anything. You didn't like show up with race results. You're just like, "Hey, I'm a guy. Can I be on your team?"
Exactly. It was it was a great deal. I wish other companies should do this, though, because I think it was a great deal for KHS too. Because you got to remember, KHS makes the same amount of money whether they sell it to the shop or they sell it to me at a discount. You know,
right? True.
So this really nice owner of the bike shop sets me up on the team, and he says, "Oh, by the way, there's this woman on the team named Marla. She's lived here for a while, and, you know, I'll introduce you to her, and she can show you the local trails." And I'm like, "Cool, you know, sounds good." So I met this Marla woman at the bike shop, and she was all covered in dirt like a mountain biker, you know, and you know, I was just like, okay, interesting enough. And we set up a time to meet and go for a ride. And again, remember, I knew nothing about mountain bike racing at the time.
Right.
So the guy at the shop said, "You know, this Marla woman's an expert. You know, she can probably teach you a lot and whatnot. and being the young, arrogant person I was at the time, I'm like, I'm a pro snowboarder. I used to race BMX. And back when I raced BMX, they were all just 2 foot tall tabletops on the tracks. They didn't have near the skill BMX requires nowadays, right? Mm-hmm. Not even close. But anyway, and I obviously I was probably a bit sexist back then. So we set up this time to go ride, and I pick her up, and I'm hungry. So on the way there, I'm like, oh, look, a Taco Bell. And on the way to do this ride. Yeah. Exactly. And she's looking at me like I'm on drugs, she's like, what are you doing? So anyway, we get to the trailhead, and she's like, okay, follow me, and I'm like, okay, I'm like, remember, man, she thinks she's an expert. Don't hurt her ego by smashing her,
Yeah.
So we start riding, and like most mountain bike rides, it starts with the climb, and halfway up the climb, this woman's just totally lost me. She's so far ahead of me, I can't even see her,
Yeah.
And we get to the top of the climb, or I get to the top of the climb, and she's up there just doing circles on the little flat space on top of the climb. And she's like, you're doing better than most of the boys. And I still to this day don't know if she was being nice or if I was actually doing better than most of the boys.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, she proceeded to kick my ass all over that ride. It was really bad for my ego, and probably great for her ego.
Right.
And probably just what I needed for my ego, actually.
Yeah.
Keep it in check a little bit. So after that, she told me about some races coming up, and she's like, you want to go with me to this race? And I said, sure. So we went to this race in Temecula, California, and I'm telling her, hey, I used to race BMX, I should probably sign up for the expert class. And it's a cross country race, by the way.
Oh, geez. Right.
And she, in the nicest way she could, she's like, Gene, it's really hard to downgrade once you upgrade. Why don't you start in beginner class? And, if you do well, you can always upgrade,
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to smoke these poor guys. This isn't really fair, but
I'm just sandbagging here, but
yeah,
okay.
I'm totally sandbagging here. So we get to the race, and, we do the sign up and all that. And how they, in cross country racing, they have like staging, like all the expert 30 to 39 meet here, all the,
Mm-hmm.
So I line up with my little group of beginners, 19 to 29 or whatever the heck the age group was. And I look around, and I'm the only guy without clipless pedals. And this is 1992, remember, right?
Yeah,
clipless pedals would probably just come out in 1992.
Right.
It might be 93. Again, I don't know the exact year. But, I look around, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I look around, and I'm also the only guy without shaved legs. I'm like, these guys are beginners? And I start looking at their legs, and like, they've got calf muscles as big as my head, And I'm like, these guys are beginners. I'm like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
And then the race starts, and we had pre-ridden the course. Marla and I had pre-ridden that course. I think the day before, or maybe a couple of days before. So when we pre-rode the course, and I thought this was going to be like the race, on the climbs, we would chit chat.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the downhill, we would, kind of bomb the downhill to the best of our abilities.
Style.
Kind of enduro style, right? So I thought that was what racing was like, right? So, the gun goes off, and these guys with calves as big as my head, they just start sprinting as hard as they can. And I'm like, it's like I'm immediately in last place. And I remember, snowboard racing is a 20 to 30 second event, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've never done an endurance sport in my life, and I know I've got asthma. I have an inhaler and everything,
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I'm going as hard as I can. And it never relented.
Yeah.
I was like, I was expecting that we'd catch our breath at some point, but no. You just go as hard as you freaking can for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And along the way, because I guess of my old BMX riding, and probably from snowboarding, I was passing a few people here and there in the downhills, and as I recall, the numbers might be a little bit off, but there were 25 riders in my little beginner class.
Mm-hmm.
And, on the way there, I'm expecting to win, by a big margin. and I got 13th out of 25, right?
Middle of the pack? Not bad.
Middle of the pack, right? And honestly, it was one of the most proud days of my life in my sporting career. I mean, I'd won plenty of snowboard races, but snowboard races don't require the kind of commitment a cross-country mountain bike race does. And I had never pushed my body that hard in my life, and honestly, I didn't know you could push your body that hard and not like have a heart attack or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was just totally naive to the whole experience. And, so yeah, I was really proud, even though I expected to win and got 13th, just the fact I didn't die was kind of being,
right.
And I beat half of those shaved leg kids with their, clipless pedals, I mean, I had toe clips,
Yeah. I mean, jeez.
So, and like, regular skateboard shoes or something, like I didn't even have any specialized shoes or anything, so anyway, that was my first race. And, as much as miserable as I made it sound, it was actually a lot of fun because, like I said, I'd never pushed my body that hard.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I was just addicted. I'm like, this is freaking cool,
Yeah.
So, and Marla, it's Marla Streb, by the way. She was a pro downhill racer in the, this is before she became a pro, but she was a pro downhill racer in the 90s and early 2000s.
Oh, cool.
And so Marla, during that race was, I'll think of her name in a second. There was a factory KHS rider there. She's from Vail, Colorado. She's a really nice woman. And I can't think of her name right now. I'll think of it in a second maybe. But anyway, Marla was trying to pass her to prove, like maybe she deserves to be on the factory team,
Yeah.
And while Marla was passing her, she broke her collarbone. She crashed and broke her collarbone. So that was my introduction
or
to mountain bike
the
racing.
other woman?
Marla did.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So that was my introduction to mountain bike racing. I suffered more than I've ever suffered in my life. And the woman that brought me to the race, this so-called expert woman, she broke her collarbone. I'm like, this is an interesting sport.
Yeah. It almost sounds like Marla purposely didn't prepare you for that race, right? She kind of wanted you to suffer.
Yeah,
I think
she saw
ego.
my ego. Yeah, exactly. I really do. And I owe her for that because I mean that was a good favor. I think we all need to be humbled a bit.
Yeah.
Or maybe not every day, but often we need to be humbled.
There are times.
Yeah. So then we did a couple more small races together, and we started going to Big Bear, which is outside of LA, up in the mountains, and in the San Gabriel Mountains. And there I did my first downhill race. And there, because of my cocky attitude, I signed up for sport instead of beginner. And and I did okay though. I did a lot better. I got like 5th out of 30 or something. So I'm like, okay, I probably maybe this is better for me. And then just as a funny story, but a couple of weeks after that race, where I did a cross country race on Sunday and downhill on Saturday, or vice versa, forget how it was back then. The guys at Team Big Bear invented this thing called Downhill Mania, where you're going to race 3 different downhills over the weekend, and you're going to go down 4 at a time, and the top 2 keep advancing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we get there, and it's raining, and I don't know, 45 degrees at the base of the mountain.
Ooh.
And then halfway up the lift, it's sleeting on us. At the very top, it's snowing.
Well, you're a snowboarder, so you're probably stoked, right?
Well, yeah, except for, I'm from Alabama. I hate cold weather. I really, really hate cold weather. And I hate wet cold weather probably the most.
Okay.
So, and I had nothing, I had my little, part of that KHS team deal was we had to, again, at wholesale prices, we had to buy a little KHS jersey and KHS shorts, okay. and this is just Lycra. Yeah. And that's all I had with me.
Oh, wow.
Right. I didn't have any of my snowboarding gear. I was in San Diego for the summer. I didn't bring my snowboard gear from Colorado.
Yeah.
All that was in storage back in Colorado. So I bought some sweatpants. I thought that'd be a good idea. And that was a really bad idea because when sweatpants get really wet, they weigh like 6,000 pounds.
Right.
And they go from your waist to about your knees, which is really dangerous when you're riding downhill in the mud.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I just quit after we had to do 3 qualifying runs. I think 1 qualifying run on each track or something. And after my first qualifying run, I'm just like, this isn't fun at all. This is miserable.
Yeah.
So I quit and just cheered Marla on. And I think she either won or got second. She did quite well.
Oh, cool.
But that was pretty much my introduction to racing. And then I moved back to Colorado that winter to continue my snowboard racing. And but I was so into mountain bike racing that I bartended for a living while I was trying to make it as a snowboarder.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go out at 3 a.m. after bartending and snowshoe up Snowmass Mountain, you know?
Wow.
And I don't know if you ever snowshoed, but it's the most pain for least amount of reward thing I've ever done in my life.
Right.
You know, but it was really fun because, you know, it was only me and the snowcat drivers out there at 2 a.m. and everything is so still, you know? So it was, but anyway, that's how into it I was. I did that all winter. And then the next summer I stayed in Colorado and I competed in the Corp Series, the Colorado Off-Road Point Series, which later was sold to Eric Jean and became the Mountain States Cup.
Okay.
And I miss those people. That was a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of early success in racing, kind of your introduction, and kind of sounds like too, you're figuring it out as you go. I mean, you did have Marla, and I'm sure there were others who kind of mentored you and showed you along the way. But then it also sounds like, from what I've read, that you reached sort of a wall in terms of your own mountain bike skills development. How did you end up going about researching proper mountain bike skills?
Funny you should ask. So one of the that winter, Marla got a contract with Iron Horse.
Okay.
To race professionally, and her the main person on that team was a guy named Toby Henderson, who was one of my BMX heroes back in the day.
Yeah.
So I would ask people like Toby. I remember asking him also because we lived in San Diego. Sometimes I would ride with Mike King, just on cross country rides and stuff. But Mike King was, I don't know if you know his name, but he was one of the best American downhillers and a great BMXer before that.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike King was he's a really quiet guy, you know, like a lot of people thought he was a jerk, but after getting to know him a little bit, he was just really, really quiet, you know, like he's just one of those people that's not very sociable. So, so anyway, I would ask him and I'd ask Toby, and they would say things like, let off the brakes, you wuss. Or, and I'm like, you know, and I'm like, well, I tried that. And I went, you know, I was asking specifically about cornering technique, and I asked Toby, and Toby literally said, let off the brakes, you wuss. And I'm like, you know, I tried that and I went flying into the woods. Like that didn't work too well. You know? So, you know, I'm like, there has to be a technique. And so many top pros at the time said, everyone's got their own style, which was true at the time. It was definitely true at the time.
Yeah.
But being at that time, by then, I was this is quite a few, you know, this is 4 years. This is, you know, I turned pro in 1995. And, you know, the story before was from 92 or 3. Okay. So, you know, this was in, you know, a couple years later. And by then I'd become a snowboard coach. And that's what I was doing for a living, was coaching the Steamboat Springs Winter Sports Club snowboard team. So I had learned through some of the best snowboard coaches in the world, you know, the people that coach our U.S. snowboard team, that yeah, there might be a lot of different styles, but there's one style that wins races and all the other styles don't win races, you know? So like what you want to do is become great at this particular style. And it's not so much a style as it's a series of, you know, techniques, basically, body position, vision. So, you know, after asking all these pros who said everyone has their own style, and they, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm going to figure this out for myself then, because there's got to be the right way. So I'm a bit of a nerd. So the first thing I did was I bought a bunch of mountain biking books, by great writers like people like Ned Overend and stuff.
Yeah.
But those books weren't actually much of a help. I mean, I learned a lot about strategy and cross country racing and that sort of thing. But if you think about it, people like Ned Overend basically invented mountain biking technique. And often the people, like, if you think about it, I don't think anybody here would take a ski lesson from the guy that invented snow skiing, right?
Yeah.
The equipment has changed a great deal, and there's been a lot of study on technique. Like I'm sure whatever techniques the first skiers had was not near what the techniques they're using to win a World Cup these days in World Cup ski racing.
Yep.
So those books, as far as skills, they really weren't that good. And these weren't coaches; these were just really good riders. So often they have trouble explaining what they're doing. Also,
right? Yeah, absolutely.
But and if you look back at it, I always encourage my students to do this because, I'm getting pretty old, and I realize that most people have no idea nowadays what mountain biking was like in the 90s. So I tell them to go back and go to YouTube and type in, 1996 World Cup downhill race or and I go, watch, you'll see that no one knew what they were doing with the exception of Nico Vulio, Nicholas Vulio. He's the nickname is the Alien, 10-time world champion. He knew what he was doing. And that's why he would win by 10 seconds in a downhill race. Often, right. So I started studying Nico, and then I realized, a very similar sport is motocross, but motocross has been around a lot longer. So, the people that coach it, they've studied it. They aren't like the, racers that are just figuring out the sport. They've had years of studying what works and what doesn't work.
Right.
So I actually learned a lot. I had 2 books. One was from Jeremy McGrath, from his coach. And the other one, I think, was a guy that coached Ricky Carmichael, the GOAT.
Okay.
So, I learned a lot from those motocross books. And then, and watching video of Nico, though. And you can still watch a video of Nico in 1996 and say, well, yep, he's doing, other than this one thing that I think Nathan Rennie kind of invented that I'll get to in a minute. Other than that, pretty much everything Nico was doing in 96 is still what you want to be doing. Like Nico had figured it out.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty
with
amazing.
The equipment that was available then too. I mean, I imagine that made it harder.
Oh, definitely. Our bikes were way too short. Our head angles were too steep. We had these little tiny 26-inch wheels. I don't know if you ever heard of those things, but I'm half joking, but yeah. So, and then though, there was this guy, he was one of the best downhillers in the world from Australia. And he was 18, I believe, at the time. I became somewhat friends with him, and his name's Nathan Rennie. And he was one of the first members of the Santa Cruz Syndicate race team. And he did win the World Cup overall one year in downhill. Phenomenal athlete. I noticed in a video that he and Cedric Gracia were both doing the same thing with their hips. Like basically, at the time, I thought they were sticking their hips to the outside of the corner. What they're actually doing is letting the bike lean over while they stayed on top of the bike. But basically their hips were beside their saddle in a corner, not beneath their saddle, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Right. So I asked Nathan why he did that. And he said, because it gives you more traction. And so I started doing it before I asked Nathan, and I realized it gave me a lot more traction. I asked Nathan about it. He would give me a few more tips, because Nathan would come to the US, and unless Greg Minnaar showed up, Nathan would usually win, the U.S. national races. So Nathan was, he was crushing it back then. So it's kind of funny. I was 30. I was like, this was like 98. So I was 33 years old, and I'm learning from an 18-year-old, but anyway, Nathan really helped a lot. And to this day, and, Nathan's technique is still spot on. The biggest thing Nathan did different than Nico was Nathan hinged so as his back is literally parallel to planet Earth. If that makes, instead of being more vertical to planet Earth.
Yeah.
And what that does is it gives you just so much negative travel in your arms, like sag in your suspension. So as you don't get yanked, like if there's a rocky corner, if your arms are straight, as your wheels go down that rock, you're going to get yanked forward.
Right.
If your arms are bent, all you have to do is slowly extend your arms as your wheel goes away from your body, and your upper body doesn't move at all. And he was the first one to do that and do it from top to bottom. So anyway, I owe a lot to Nathan Rennie. I learned a lot from that guy and from those motorcycle coaches.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, it sounds like you studied a number of athletes and looked even to other sports to kind of figure out what they had figured out. Were there any surprises initially or aha moments where you're like, oh wow, I never would have thought of that, or like that seems really counterintuitive?
Oh yes, two. The first one that was just mind-boggling to me was the concept of countersteering. So in both those motocross books I was telling you about, and a book by a road motorcycle coach named Keith Code. He's a very famous, the crotch rocket type racer guys. He coaches that. They all mentioned this thing called countersteering, and they all said that on a two-wheeled vehicle going above, and they use like 12 miles an hour, going above 12, this is the physics of how a bike turns, and we're all doing it. A lot of us just don't know that we're doing it.
Okay.
And so, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm not countersteering, because countersteering to me is like, if you've ever watched Mert Lawwell or one of the, or flat track motorcycle racing, where they're going around a flat oval on the dirt, and their wheels turn to the right. Their front wheel is basically steered to the right, but they're making a left turn.
Yeah.
To me, that's countersteering, right? And I'm pretty sure my wheel wasn't doing that.
Yeah.
But then through a lot of experiments, I realized that I am countersteering. But I kind of, for my courses, I've changed the name to counter pressure, because we only truly countersteer at the initiation of a turn.
Yeah.
Once we initiate that turn, the wheel somewhat flops in. And what we're doing is, with counter pressure, we're fighting that flop. If we let the wheel flop in, our bike would stand up, and we would either high side, fly over the top of our bike, or we would go straight again, but our turn would be over. So we do use a counter steering motion to initiate the turn. And in my courses, it's also, for my students, one of the biggest aha moments. I mean, some of them know it. My students that ride motorcycles sometimes know it, but a lot of students don't. And for them, it was just like me. It was just like, it opens up just this whole other world and makes you understand cornering.
Yeah.
And, anyway, you asked me for an aha moment. That was one of them.
Yeah. And
the next one, and this to this day cracks me up. And this is why there's coaches in almost every sport. I like to use skiing as the example of this. Snow skiing, half the reason I got into snowboarding is snow skiing is the least intuitive thing I've ever done in my life. Like, your instincts tell you to do the exact opposite things that you want to do on skis to ski correctly.
Yeah.
The biggest one being leaning back. When you're fearful, the human wants to move away from danger. So on snow skis, when you're going downhill, if you get nervous, you want to lean back.
Yeah.
Which is the worst thing you can do on a snow on skis or a snowboard, actually.
Yeah. And, I'm teaching my son how to rollerblade, and it's the same thing. He wants to lean back, and I keep saying, lean forward, lean forward.
Yeah, exactly. And leaning forward intuitively feels scary as crap. You think you're going to flip over forward. So it turns out it's the same thing on mountain biking. Like when I first turned pro, most of us would brag, even with our little 26-inch rear wheels, we would have skid marks from our tire on our butt, because that's how far back we were getting on these steep hills, But it turns out what we need to do, which does still involve your butt being behind the seat on a steep hill, but we need to keep our weight on the pedals. And I learned that from a motorcycle book. And I found when I kept my weight on my pedals that I had much more control and felt more in balance. And I remember I did a course in Bootleg Canyon, one of my downhill courses, and to get more people into the course, as I was telling you before, my friend Marla Streb was really famous. So I had her, hired her to be my assistant coach.
Mm.
Right. So we spent the weekend camped next to each other in a little Volkswagen Vans in the parking lot. And we would coach during the day. And at night we would discuss technique, because I'd been coaching Marla off and on more with her mental game, not with her skills.
Yeah.
And just to shout out to this person, one of the first people to coach mountain bike skills in a structured way was a woman named Blair Lombardi. And she had taught Marla. And I remember riding behind Marla and just being like, oh my gosh, like she's perfect. Like her skill, it's just spot on. I was always amazed by her skill, once she had worked with this woman, Blair Lombardi. As far as the weight on the pedals, that was an aha moment for me. I'm discussing, the course before it starts with Marla. Obviously, I need to make sure she's on the same page I am with the coaching. And I talk about, hey, I learned this cool new thing. I learned it from a motocross book. I'm trying to keep all my weight on my pegs or on my pedals,
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she laughed. She goes, oh, I've been doing that for years. And I'm like, well, thanks for telling me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't doing that for years.
Right.
And it's one of those things, as I mentioned before, it's where the instincts get in the way. Because, man, I still to this day, I'll tell my students, I've been teaching, since I started Better Ride. I started Better Ride in 99. I think I learned the weight on the pedals thing in like 2001 or something like that. But even to this day, so for 20 years, I've been teaching people to keep all their weight in the pedals, no matter what's going on, other than maybe in a manual. But it's a different story. But I still, when I get scared, the first thing that happens is that butt starts to scoot back,
right?
Because that's a human instinct to move away from danger.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that I know to stay centered, and it doesn't matter that it somewhat matters. I've been practicing it forever because I don't get back that much. And I usually immediately catch myself and get centered again. But it just shows you how powerful our instincts are.
Right. Yeah. Well, what's the best way to counteract that? Is it just practice and constantly reminding yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And doing drills. One place I always work on weight in the pedals, like here in Moab, I live on top of a hill. So unless I want to ride Pipe Dream, which is basically in my backyard, every other ride I do from my house, I start descending on pavement.
Okay.
That's the perfect place to work on it. Otherwise you're bored, right? I remember the Iron Horse Classic years ago had part of their cross country course had a downhill section on pavement. And I remember thinking, this is an abomination. It's okay if a climb was on pavement, maybe, but you can't have a descent in a mountain bike race on pavement.
Yeah, why waste a downhill?
It's why waste a downhill, exactly. But unfortunately, we all have probably areas where we're descending on a dirt road in a straight line and it's boring as crap, or we're descending on a little piece of pavement. Those are great places to work on it, because otherwise you'd just be bored, because you can't, if it's a gnarly trail and you're really focused on your weight and your pedals, you're probably not looking ahead. You're probably doing something else wrong, and you're probably going to crash. So that's where so many mountain bikers make the mistake of thinking they can actually ride their bike and practice at the same time on trail.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because there's just way too much self-preservation when you're on trail kicking in, and you forget. Even with my students, I say, okay, what's our purpose? Okay. Purpose is looking through these corners. We get to the bottom. I'm like, did you look through those corners? I did the first couple, but then I got distracted, and, you forget, like basketball players, if Shaquille O'Neal is on your team, you don't practice layups with Shaquille O'Neal guarding the basket.
Right.
Even though you're a pro and you've been practicing layups since you were 6 years old, you still practice with no one guarding the basket, so you get the mechanics down correctly.
Yeah. You break
Does
it
that make
down.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they might spend, 10 or 20% of their time playing against Shaquille O'Neal.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of the time is doing drills.
Right.
And that's the only way to create procedural memory that just fires. Because what we want is, no matter how gnarly that trail is, our body just does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way to do that is to practice with an eye on perfection. If you're practicing at 80% right, you might say, dude, I'm doing it 80% right. And that does sound good.
Yeah.
But another way of saying that is you're practicing doing it 20% wrong.
Right.
So it's imperative that we spend time practicing off the trail. So we get the procedural memory. Procedural memory is like a recipe in your brain for how to do something, such as a manual.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to get that recipe wired in your brain. So it is the circuit that fires. Whenever you want that front wheel to come up while coasting, just the manual circuit fires.
Yeah.
Not the yank up on those handlebars circuit that you probably have, like I did because that's what I did. When I first rode rough trails like Porcupine Rim, I would just yank the front wheel off the ground over all the bumps because it worked. Yeah. But it's terribly taxing and it throws you off balance. It's really not the best way to do it, but it does get the wheel up.
And that's, a lot of us have a lot of muscle memory built up over years and years and years of doing that.
Exactly. So, and that's why even when you know and understand something, you often don't do it. Like I've had so many people come up to me and say, "Oh, you coach mountain biking? What do you teach? Do you teach this?" I go, "Yeah, so some of these I teach." He goes, "Oh, why would I take your course? I know all that." And then I always just say, and then they do. And I know they know all that. Not everything I coach, but I know they know a fair amount of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I always just say, I'm like, "You know all this?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I go, "Well, why aren't you doing it then?" And they're always like, "Oh, I do it." I go, "No, you don't." I'm like, "I just watched you. You don't do this." And then I'm like, "I'll break the video camera out if you want, and I'll video you. And, you tell me if you're doing what you just said you're doing,
Right.
And I'm the same way. I mean, I think we all feel like we're better than we are, if that makes sense to you. When I was a snowboarder, we were working on the half pipe one day, and I remember telling all my friends, I'm like, "Man, the first hit in that half pipe, it's awesome. I'm getting like 3 feet out, meaning I'm getting 3 feet above the half pipe."
Yeah.
And they all looked at me, all my friends would look at me kind of quizzically, and I'm like, they're just jealous. You know what I mean? But they gave me this look like, "You're not getting 3 feet out." And I'm just like, they're just jealous, because I'm so damn good. Yeah. And then that evening we watched the video, and I was getting maybe 6 inches out of that half pipe.
Right.
But it sure as heck felt like I was getting 3 feet out of that half pipe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think a lot of us, because we know, and this is one of the biggest things I try to instill in my students, just because you know something means almost nothing. You have to be able to put what you know into action. And you need to be able to put it in action on the gnarliest of trails. If you're looking down while you're riding a pretty boring dirt road, you're probably going to get away with it. Like, you might go a little slower than you would if you're looking ahead, but you're probably not going to crash or anything.
Right.
But if you're looking down in that rooty, rocky, gnarly section, then there's going to be a problem.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, everything needs to be ingrained so much that we can do it in the nastiest of conditions, and we're not thinking about doing it. Our body just does it.
Right. Yeah, you make a good point. And I think, was it Yoda that said knowing is not doing? I mean, like that's just because you know it doesn't mean you do it. And we're all human. I mean, we can point to any number of examples in our lives where it's like we know healthy foods to eat, but do we always eat healthy foods? No. So
and it shows you the power of habit, right?
Exactly.
Because I'm marrying a woman who has a 12-year-old daughter who I love. Clara hates when I curse. Mm-hmm. So I do my best to not curse in front of her, but I still curse in front of her because it's a habit.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then I'm always apologetic and I catch myself. But that's the thing. Like, I know not to cuss in front of my daughter, even if she didn't find it so offensive, it's just not a good thing you want to teach your child.
Right.
It's like, but I still do it because it's a habit. I mean, I'm getting better. Again, with practice, I'm getting better. But that's, I think we got a little bit off topic there, but that's
no, these are life lessons. Well, two of the concepts that you mentioned so far, body positioning, and you also talked about cornering and about steering. Another thing that I feel like you incorporate into your training and your coaching is this idea of conservation of momentum on the trail. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like how do you see sort of maximizing speed while minimizing your effort?
This is an excellent topic. And it's interesting too, because, you asked, a lot of my students sign up so they can learn to ride faster. Mm-hmm. And as I've gotten older and some of my students have gotten older, that's not even true so much. I think most of my students sign up because they want to be more confident and have more fun. Okay. But a good percentage, still want to get faster. Excuse me. I think everyone wants to get faster, but they don't want to get recklessly faster. You know what I mean? Like they would love, if they could do this cross country ride in 2 hours instead of 2.5, they would love that, but they don't want to, risk their neck to do that. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Or maybe they see their buddies, right? I mean, a lot of us, ride with others in group rides, and we feel like, oh, I don't want to be the slowest guy in the bunch. And you look at other people and you're like, how are they able to, beat me down the hill so badly all the time? What am I doing wrong here?
Exactly. And I read a lot of philosophy. And one of the most interesting things that I still struggle with a little bit is the concept that there is no good and there is no bad. It's just what we label things, right? Mm-hmm. So, and this is a great example. As I mentioned, I have asthma. That, for a mountain bike racer, that's a pretty horrible thing to have. But boy, for a coach, what a wonderful thing to have. Because I realized I wasn't going to out-pedal anyone. Remember, I raced cross. For those listening that weren't around mountain biking in the 90s, everyone did everything. Like if you signed up for a race on the same bike, you would often do a hill climb, downhill, and a cross country race. And right before I got into the sport, it kind of died right about the time I got in the sport. Mm-hmm. They often had trials competitions. Literally, you would do a trials competition, a cross country race, a downhill, and maybe a hill climb in the same weekend on the same bike, which is pretty awesome. Honestly, I kind of wish it was still that way because there was a lot more intermixing of tribes, kind of. Mm-hmm. Now it's like the downhill tribe and the enduro tribe and the cross country tribe, and they kind of don't even know each other. Mm-hmm. Which is it's kind of sad. So anyway. I realized I wasn't going to out-pedal people, so I had to become more efficient. Mm. And I was out riding with a buddy of mine. We were both sport cross-country racers at the time, as well before I started coaching and mountain biking. And we were on a trail probably a lot of listeners are familiar with. It's called Mary's Loop and Lions Loop in Fruita, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And we were out on Lions. And my buddy, he always beat me, not by much, but I mean, he would definitely beat me by, 2 or 3 minutes in an hour and a half race, which actually is a fair amount of time, I guess. He realized that on this kind of tricky section that had a lot of little short ups and downs and a lot of little corners, that he was in my way, And so finally he's just like, am I in your way? You can go ahead. And I'm like, okay, which I thought was odd because this guy's way fitter than me,
Yeah.
And after he let me go ahead, after about 2 minutes, I turn around and he's way the heck back there.
Yeah.
He's just way back there. And so I started realizing that, my background growing up with the two biggest things I loved growing up were skateboarding and BMX. And then I got into snowboarding when I was in my 20s. And through all three of those sports, I learned how to work with the terrain to my advantage. Pumping, contouring, which is kind of like pumping, but you're not using as much energy. You're not trying to gain speed. You're trying to just keep the wheels on the ground. And I started watching my buddy, and I realized he was so incredibly stiff on that bike. Like literally whatever the bike did, he did, which means if his rear wheel suddenly gained 2 feet, his head and chest suddenly gained 2 feet, and that's not very efficient. It takes a lot of strength or a lot of energy to move, someone's head, chest, and hips up 2 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
Whereas on the same little 2-foot bump, my hips weren't moving because I was just sucking it up with my legs and my arms, and then there's so many little things like that will make you so much more efficient on the bike. And one big thing, though, is looking ahead. And, it's so funny because it's the most over talked about and underutilized thing I've ever seen in my life. Like everybody knows to look ahead.
Right.
And 90% of mountain bikers, I believe, think they are looking ahead. But if you watch, they're simply not. I mean, it's really sad. I was at the, I think it was 2010 or 2011 national championships were in at Sol Vista, Colorado, which is now Granby Ranch. And at the cross country race, there were these 3 wide open, I mean, we're talking like 50-foot radius corners that had a small berm on them. And I watched as the 3 guys who got first, second, and third in the national championship cross country race came through those corners. And because they were all looking about 3 feet in front of their front wheel, which gives you the perception of going very, very fast, they were all dragging their brakes. And I promise you, they, you, me, we could all sprint at those corners at a full gallop and not brake at all and make it through those corners as long as we were looking through, even with no good cornering skill. They just weren't challenging corners.
Yeah.
And I timed it. So, I videoed these guys and I timed it. I put my video camera up and then I did it myself. And it took them, my numbers, remember this is 10 years ago, but it took them, let's say 7 seconds to get through those corners. The 2 corners combined.
Yeah.
It took me like 4. But not only did it only take me 4, I was using less energy. It takes a lot of energy to brake because you're resisting. When you're braking, your body wants to continue to accelerate. So you have to brace yourself against the bike so you slow at the same rate the bike does.
Right.
So that takes energy. Secondly, I don't know. I didn't have a radar gun, but I exited that last corner probably going twice as fast as they did.
Right.
Which means I covered that next straightaway at twice the speed they did while using less energy because they probably got on the pedals and sprinted across that straightaway. I probably did that straightaway faster than them, and I didn't pedal one bit. And you can see how that adds up all the way around a race course or just a track, a trail you're riding. It doesn't have to be a race course. And it's amazing because I guarantee in my cross country race courses that you'll shave 2 minutes an hour off of your times. Like you can use Strava to test this.
Yeah.
And I had a student, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, tell me on the Sunday of the course, he's like, Gene, I pretty much knew everything you've said in this course. I learned a little bit, but I've got a 6-hour drive home and I don't want to drive at night. So I'm going to leave at noon. Right. And I'm like, okay, and he takes off and I'm thinking, okay, that's one of the students that's going to ask me for his money back on Monday. No biggie, it happens, right? I'd be explaining something and he was looking off in the distance, not even looking at me, not even paying attention half the course, So anyway, sure enough, it wasn't Monday after the course. It was Tuesday after the course. I get an email from the guy. And he was a, serious expert Cat 1 cross country racer in his 30s or in his 40s, I think. And for those that don't know, the 40 and over Cat 1 class is the most cutthroat badass racers. Because if you're still racing cross country over 40, you're a freaking stud. Like there's no easy pickings. Like, well, at least I'll beat these 4 guys. You know what I mean? It's like, no, like you got to be on your A game. Yeah. So this guy, like a smart cross country racer, this guy used Strava. He used a heart rate monitor and a power meter, to track his progress. And one of the few times he was paying attention in my course, we were talking about it's great, and I recommend this to everyone listening. It's great if you have a loop that you do near your house fairly consistently. It can, because it's great for testing things. You can use Strava or a little stopwatch and say, okay, my best lap is an hour, or 1 hour, 1 minute and 30 seconds, or whatever. Write that down, and then you say, I'm going to try less tire pressure, see if I'm faster, see if I'm slower, and then do it again. Yeah. Especially if you have a heart rate monitor and or a power meter, because then you can try to maintain the same power and the same heart rate throughout the ride, and see if you got faster or slower.
Yeah.
So this guy had a course like that. So, and in the course, he had told me, he goes, yeah, man, my record is 1 hour, 1 minute and 20 seconds, I think is what he said, something to that effect. So anyway, I get this email from him on the Tuesday after my course ended on Sunday. This is the Tuesday after the course. And he said, hey, I wasn't really too stoked on your course. I paid a lot of money, and, thought I knew most of that.
Yeah.
But I decided, since I paid $800, I was going to use your vision techniques today and do that loop I told you about. And by the way, the vision techniques, a lot of what I teach, I've got to give credit. I learned from Keith Code, the motorcycle coach I told you about earlier.
Yeah.
So he went out and used those techniques, and he said, Gene, you told me when you're looking ahead, it feels like you're going slower. And, because, man, sure enough, I felt like I was going slower. The whole, pretty much the whole ride, I felt like I was going a little slower than I usually do. And, my heart rate monitor data and my power meter data backed that up. I wasn't using my normal amount of power, and, my heart rate was a little lower than normal. But, I paid $850 for that course. I'm going to give this a good test. And he goes, so I kept focusing on, looking ahead, using the vision techniques you taught me. And, I got done. And again, I looked at the power meter, looked at my heart rate monitor while my Strava was loading. And I was a little disappointed, because they were both, lower than normal, not way lower. I don't remember the exact percentage, but, they were lower than normal. And then he said, and then the Strava finally loaded and it said 56 minutes.
Oh, geez. Wow.
So the next sentence cracked me up. So I guess your stuff might work. Let's have to use a different word for stuff, I think.
Right.
Right. And that blew me away, honestly. I did not think, especially remember, this is his first day practicing those techniques. He's probably not particularly good at those vision techniques. I did not expect a really close to 10% time savings. I expected a 3 to 5% time saving, but he saved 10%.
Yeah, geez.
And I watch so many American down cross country racers that, I mean, they've got to be as fit as those European racers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why do they always get 10th place?
Yeah.
Or 11th place at World Cups, as their best finish. And a lot of it to me is they just don't have great technique. And unfortunately, and I'll say this as someone who fights with his ego constantly, their egos just get in the way. Because, I mentioned those guys that got top 3 at Sol Vista at the national championships. I found 2 of them after the race. And I approached them and said, hey, congratulations, great job. I was watching you ride today, and I noticed a few things that, you could improve on that would definitely save you some time.
Sure, that went over well.
Oh, God, it went over, like a fart in church, I mean, it was I mean, they took great offense to this, and I prefaced it with like, I'm a coach, I'm a professional downhill racer. This is what I do.
Yeah, and you started with congratulations. So
and I started with congratulations. I mean, I did my best to not come off as I know everything and you suck or something, because they obviously didn't suck. They just got the top 3 finishes, in the national championships. One of them was a national champion, but it blew me away that, and this is a big difference between European mountain bike racers and American mountain bike racers, and probably almost any other country, South African mountain bike racers even, is in every other country, they're looking for the smallest edge. They're looking for any edge.
Yeah.
Oh, if I eat, 4 kiwi fruit before the race, I'm going to go faster. I'll try that. You know what I mean? Like they're looking for any edge. And here I was offering these people an edge, and they didn't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And it's, and I do understand, mountain biking is a very do-it-yourself sport.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very do-it-yourself country.
Right.
Everyone wants to feel like they did it on their own. And people will tell me that. Gene, you started Better Ride on your own, dude. That's your business. You should be really proud. And I am really proud, but I didn't do it on my own. No one. I mean, I use the roads my tax dollars and your tax dollars pay for, to get to places. I used BLM land that I have permits for. Nathan Rennie helped me. Cedric Gracia helped me. Like I said, all these people helped me. I didn't do it on my own. Like Greg Menard didn't become who he is on his own. It's mostly Greg. And Greg deserves all the praise he gets because he is a phenomenal person, and 90% of it is his personal drive to win and blah, blah, blah. But he's received a boatload of help along the way, and I think he would acknowledge, I know he would acknowledge that. Yeah. But anyway, I'm off in left field again. But, it's sad to me because the only course I have right now that isn't selling well is my cross-country race course.
Huh.
And no one needs this more than cross-country racers.
Right.
Because they race the longest. So a small percentage difference can make the biggest gain for them, than it would in a downhill race. I mean, 1% faster in a downhill race in a 2-minute race is barely a second, because that's 120 seconds. A 1% difference in a 2-hour race is a massive difference.
Right.
Even better, a 5 or in the case of that one student of mine, a 10% difference the day after my course.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah. I mean, even as you found in the early 90s, racing is competitive, even at every level.
Yeah.
And if you want to win, there you gotta put in the work. And it's interesting too, the student you mentioned that saw such a big improvement just from focusing on vision. I think a lot of us too, it's like we may be really good at some of the skills, but then there's like that one thing that's like really, really holding us back. And you'll never know what that is until you break it down and start working on each of the parts kind of individually.
Yeah. I mean, again, just like in snow skiing, when I started to learn how to do everything correctly before, when I was a pro, before I started Better Ride, almost everything that's intuitive is wrong. So, I've had so many students that have been riding, like, I don't know if you know who Bryson Martin is. Bryson Martin Sr. Owns and started DVO Suspension.
Okay.
And his son, Bryson Martin Jr., was a pro motocrosser and a pro downhill racer. So he took one of my courses from me. And at the time, Bryson Martin owned Tenneco USA, which was basically Marzocchi USA. And Bryson said, "Hey, can I sit in? I'll be on my phone doing business a lot, but when I'm not on my phone, can I sit in on the course?" And I'm thinking, you own Marzocchi, yes, you can sit in. This might be good for me,
Right.
So, and I didn't know this, but Bryson has been mountain biking since the 80s.
Oh wow!
And Bryson is a badass. Like he will whip my tail in a cross country race, or probably an enduro type race. If, like downhill, I'm sure I'd beat him. Well, I'm not sure, but I think I'd beat him. But he can definitely, out pedal me. And he'd been riding for 30 years. And at the end of the course, he was like, "Thank you for finally teaching me how to ride after 30 years."
Oh, wow.
I was doing so much wrong, and that was just, one of the proudest moments of my career, really, when you have someone with his background say that. But I've had so many students say that. And again, I'm not bragging about my coaching. I'm just bragging about coaching in general in anything that you do. If you go out and play golf every day, and meanwhile I'm taking lessons, right now you might be able to whip my butt. But in 2 years, if I took 2 years of golf lessons, at the end of those 2 years, I'm going to be way better than somebody that's a self-taught golfer. I guarantee you that.
Right.
Yeah.
And
the difference with mountain biking is kind of dangerous. Golf's not so dangerous.
Right.
Whereas mountain biking is pretty dangerous. So it's just one of those things that, if we could be more like the Europeans and go, wow, I know a lot about this sport, but I bet there's some stuff I don't know. And maybe there's some stuff I do know that I'm not doing. Maybe I should look into this. Before, anyone listening thinks I'm just trying to sell my product. If you look at my schedule, most of my courses sell out already. I don't really need any more business. I just want to help people. You know what I mean? And this is a great way to get better, at anything that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is part 1 of our conversation with Gene. Be sure to tune in next week for the second part of our interview. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week. I noticed there's an article on your website titled, "Is Mountain Biking Wrecking Your Health?" And, obviously most of us just assume we're doing something good for our bodies by going out for a ride. But it sounds like if we don't have possibly good form, we could be causing damage to ourselves. Is that true?
Well, a little bit true. The biggest form thing I'll give you right now, there's only one form thing that's really going to probably help you not damage your body as much. And that's hinging at the hips versus kind of bending at your belly button.
Okay.
Literally focusing on hinging with a flat back. Because how in mountain biking, both when we're standing and descending or when we're seated and climbing, we tend to kind of lower our chest towards the handlebars a bit, especially the steeper the climb if we're seated and climbing. Well, when we lower that chest, do it from the hips with a hinge, not from rounding your back, right? Okay. And it's really interesting, and there might be some aerodynamic thing to this, or it might be the fact they typically don't have the strongest cores. Because I see this in the Tour de France a lot, like these really rounded backs. And I'm like, that can't be good for you. I'm just like, that looks terrible to me.
Yeah.
But, maybe it's more aerodynamic or I don't know. I don't know the whole spiel behind that. But that's what I'm getting at when I talk about wrecking your health. And I say this because all of the things I'm about to tell you have happened to me. Because like I think many people, when I first got into mountain biking, I was like, this is awesome. I don't need to go to the gym anymore. I get this great exercise and I'm outside and, I mentally, I feel so much better. And I tell you what, mountain biking is incredible for our mental health. It does wonders for our heart health and our lungs and some of our leg muscles.
Some of them.
It does. And that's the problem. Is again, with almost any sport, there's a lot of imbalances in mountain biking where you're working one muscle, but not the opposing muscle. Right. So, and there's certain things in mountain biking like that everyone will tell you. Mountain biking requires a very strong and stable core and lower back, which is part of your core. But it doesn't develop that at all. Right. You can ride for hours and hours a day and it's not going to develop that core strength, right? But you need that core strength to ride well. It also, there's a lot of imbalances in the fact that it really, really works our quadriceps and our gluteus maximus, but it doesn't really work our hamstrings that much.
Hmm.
So, and it also, there's a ton of stability muscles in our legs, and it works them in funny ways, or it doesn't even use them. And if you can strengthen all those muscles, you're not going to get and maintain your mobility, you're not going to get as many of these overuse injuries and these imbalance injuries.
Okay.
You know, one of my favorite things, I love this guy, Hans Ray calls it your chocolate foot in one of his videos, right? And your chocolate foot is the foot you like to put forward.
Mm-hmm.
And all but 2 mountain bikers I've ever met and discussed this with, including Greg Minnaar, they all favor one foot forward over the other. I don't know. Like I said, I've met 2 people that say they can honestly ride either foot forward and it doesn't matter.
Huh.
And I'm jealous as heck of those 2 people because I cannot do that. So when it gets on easy trails, I do it a lot. More and more when the trail's easy, the first thing I try to do is put my non-chocolate foot forward, which is my right foot. I always ride left foot forward, right?
Yeah.
So I put the non-chocolate foot forward, but it still feels awkward. And the second there's going to be some roots or rocks to go over, or a jump to hit, or a corner I got to hit fast, I put that left foot forward again. That's just where I'm more comfortable. But the problem is that creates this twisted torso. My hips, anyone who studies this can probably articulate this a little bit better than me, but we have myofascia, which is kind of like our spider web surrounding all of our muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it explained to me once by a body worker, and it was a great way she explained it. It's like a spider web. Okay. So if you're looking at a window in your house, and there's a spider web that takes up the entire window in your house, but you pull on it only 1 inch from the lower left corner, does it only affect that part of the spider web? Or does it kind of affect the entire spider web? Right. So I first realized this. I was getting a massage from my massage therapist, or a new massage therapist to me, who happens to be a mountain biker. And she said, "Oh, so your right leg is your trailing leg." And I'm like, "How did you know that?" And she's like, "The way it's twisted." You know? And then I went to a chiropractor years after that, and he had me stand in front of a sheet against the wall. He goes, "Square up against that sheet. I want your right shoulder to be, say 3 feet away, and your left shoulder 3 feet away, and your left hip bone 3 feet away, and your right hip bone 3 feet away." So I lined up perfectly square to that sheet. And then he dropped the sheet, and behind that sheet was a mirror. And I would say one of my shoulders was 30 inches from that mirror, and the other one was 20 inches from that mirror.
Oh, wow.
Like, I was drastically twisted. But we have this thing called proprioception. It's kind of our awareness of where our body is in space. Our proprioception adjusts to anything. It's amazing. So my proprioception had adjusted to being crooked like that, so it didn't feel like I was crooked.
Yeah.
Right? So all these things are what can really wreck your health with mountain biking. And yes, what we love to do in life, what skeptics love to do, and I'm a skeptic, what skeptics love to do in life is they'll point out the anomalies. Well, yeah, this guy doesn't do that, and he's fine.
Right.
Yeah, he's a freak. But the majority of people that do this aren't fine. Right? So we all have that buddy that doesn't stretch ever and is more flexible than we are. Well, again, I'm just jealous of that guy. But if I live his lifestyle, I know what happens to me. I've quit this sport twice. Right? Twice I've completely quit mountain biking. Once I took like 8 weeks off and went to Bali and just did yoga for 8 weeks and 1 week of surf camp. And that finally got my body straightened out enough I did a bunch of physical therapy while I was there too.
Yeah.
And then most recently I was 50 years old, and the World Masters Championships were in Val di Sole, Italy. And I signed up. I paid my entry fee, and I was up in Whistler training my butt off, doing some BC and Canada Cup downhill races, plus training at Whistler. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't ride anymore. After every lap at Whistler, my body would just hurt worse after every and during it. And I went to the chiropractor in Whistler that I'd been to before, and on his desk was this book called Foundation Training. Mm-hmm. And I remember it had a foreword by Lance Armstrong.
Oh, wow.
So I bought that book and I just put it on a shelf because after that chiropractic appointment and taking a couple of weeks off from riding, I felt better again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm at my little place in South Africa that winter, and I'm taking my wetsuit off, and my back locks up. And I literally, for 2 days, I just crawled around my little house in South Africa. I could not stand up for 2 days, you know. And then I remember that book. I'm like, why don't you open that book? and I started doing the exercises in that book, and after a day of doing those exercises, then a day off, then another day of doing those exercises, the next day I went and rode my mountain bike and felt great.
Oh, wow.
Right. But since then, it's been a constant battle because like most humans, I'll do that foundation training until I feel really good and strong. And then I'll keep doing it so I stay good and strong. But then because I'm feeling so good and strong, I start slacking. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden the back goes out again or something, you know?
Right.
So, but my back has never gone out while I'm actively doing my foundation training, you know? Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to help people not do what I did. Obviously that article, especially the people that didn't read the article and just commented on the title of the article, mm-hmm. It's really funny. If you go to my LinkedIn page, people just tore it apart, and it's obvious they didn't read it. Because if you read the article and then read all the comments on my blog, which means to get to the bottom of my blog, they probably read the article. Mm-hmm. They're all super positive, you know. They're like, "Oh man, thank you. You know, this really makes sense." Blah blah blah. But so you know, obviously that's not going to help my business much by writing that article. Mm-hmm. I wrote that article to help people not go through all the pain I've gone through, and to teach them to take care of their bodies. I mean, just think of the position we are in mountain biking. We're hinged over while we're trying to look ahead. Right. That puts a massive strain on our necks.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I can't think of any sport where the correct descending posture, you know, so bad for our necks, but you know, puts us in an athletic position otherwise than being bad for our necks, you know. Yeah. And you know, it's kind of the opposite of sitting in front of a computer all day, which is also bad. And that's another reason, you know, as I wrote my article, I don't know about everybody else's life, but my life is sit in front of my computer all day, answering emails and writing my blog articles and working on my business, and then going out and riding.
Right.
You know, so it's like, you know, and especially since COVID, I used to always try to do at least 2 yoga classes a week and a bunch of yoga on my own. Mm-hmm. But since COVID, you know, the yoga classes are online, and that's just not the same to me. You know, it doesn't motivate me in the same way. Mm-hmm. And I haven't done a yoga class in over a year now.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, luckily I do my own stuff. But so my whole thing on that was I just want people to realize that mountain biking is really good for our mental health, good for our heart, good for our lungs, good for parts of our legs. Mm-hmm. But if we can add some cross training into that and some mobility training into that, we're going to be able to mountain bike much longer in our life and enjoy it much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, you mentioned a number of different names in our conversation so far, different folks you've worked with over the years. Tell us about 1 or 2 of the pros that you've worked with who really stands out in terms of like the work that they put in and then kind of the gains that they were able to make based on this idea of like really focusing in on technique and form.
Okay. I'm going to start with a person that I coach that I just think is a wonderful human, and that's Sue Haywood. I was fortunate to coach her in, I think I did a camp outside of Philadelphia about 10 years ago or 11 years ago. And she ended up working for me as a Better Ride coach for a little while. And for those that don't know her, she did everything correct to get a spot in the maybe 2000 Olympics or maybe 1996 Olympics. I forget. Or maybe I don't know which Olympics. Might have been 2004 or 8 Olympics. Yep. But she did it all right. She did everything USA Cycling told her to do. And then they gave her spot to somebody else.
Oh, no.
Right? So she sued USA Cycling, and I believe she won. You know, she can't discuss this, one of those settlements where you can't discuss your settlement.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, she is probably the most genuine, awesome human. And it took probably a lot for someone of that caliber to trust someone like me who's not near her caliber and take coaching from me. And now she does, I don't know if she still does a lot, but she definitely puts on a lot of courses on her own on the East Coast where she's from in Virginia.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to give her a shout out because she's amazing. And then the two people, you said two, so it's so hard to break it down to two. But one person that I've worked with quite a bit as my assistant coach, but I did teach him a bit about body position. And what's amazing about him, it's just his mindset. And that's Greg Minnaar, right? He's for those listening that aren't into downhill racing, Greg Minnaar, his nickname is the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
Yep.
He's won the most World Cups of anybody. And he's 40 years old this year, I believe, maybe 39. I think 40 this year. Last year, he was 39, and he won a World Cup downhill at 39, which is pretty freaking amazing, right?
Yeah.
And what that guy has is I've never met somebody that wants to win like he does. But yet at the same time, on the race course and on race day, yes, he's got a big ego. He's freaking Greg Minnaar. but when you meet him outside of mountain biking, if you don't bring up mountain biking, he might never mention the fact that he even rides.
Oh, wow.
You know, like he's very humble. And I respect that. Now, as far as people I've worked with, a couple of people that really stand out are Mitch Ropolato. Mitch Ropolato, again, for those that don't know, he's one of the best all-around mountain bikers in the world. He's gotten second in his second ever World Cup. He got second place in a 4-cross race. He's gotten 11th place in a World Cup downhill. He's gotten second place in an EWS. He's been the king of Crankworks multiple times. Mm-hmm. He wins slalom races. He wins pump track competitions. Every discipline but cross country, he's won in. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And what I love about Mitch is his love of riding. So he loves it way more than I do. I mean, I go out and I ride, and then I come home and I stretch. Mitch will go out and ride, and then before or after his ride, he might spend half an hour at the BMX track or at the skateboard park, just cranking airs out of the jumps, or at the dirt jumps, you know, or just goofing off on the curb in front of his house, trying to do some weird manual landing or something like that. He's on that bike. I don't know if he's still this way. I think he is from the videos I watch, but he's on that bike all day long. And so is his good friend, Cody Kelly, who I've also coached. Mm-hmm. They just love riding bikes. And there's a kid, he's not a kid anymore. So funny. I think of all these guys as kids, but they're all adults now. There's a guy I coached when he was a kid named Sean Neer. He rides for Yeti, and he and Cody are both co-world champions. They won the World Enduro Championship 2 years ago with their teammate Richie Rude. Mm-hmm. And Sean Neer, again, just like Cody and Mitch, they're committed to practicing. You know, not only do they do their cornering drills and a lot of stuff that I taught them, they do a ton of stuff I didn't teach them. Like I said, all three of those guys like riding BMX tracks and skate parks and dirt jumps. They just love riding bikes, and it shows because they're three of the most famous American mountain bikers right now.
Yeah.
And it's obviously paid off for them. Something I really try to stress, and this is a life skill. You get out of life what you put into it. Mm-hmm. You get out of mountain biking what you put into it. If you go out and do a 100-mile ride every day, you're probably going to be super fit aerobically.
Right.
You know, but your skills are probably going to be lacking if that's all you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you go to the skate park every day and just practice skills all day, you might not have the endurance to ride a 30-mile ride,
Mm-hmm.
So, you got to break it up. But they really stand out. And I got to give a shout out to two other students. One who probably might not even remember this. Years ago, I did a course for the Y Riders out of Boulder, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this tiny little girl named Chloe. And her married name now is Chloe Woodruff.
Mm-hmm.
Woodruff.
Yep.
And she's one of the best American cross-country racers now. And I'm not taking any responsibility for her success or anything. It's just cool to see this young, wide-eyed 12-year-old or 11-year-old when I coached her turn into this awesome pro.
Yeah. Wow.
And then lastly, I had a student in Dallas, Texas. This guy's from a rancher from Waco, Texas. I coached him when he was 78 years old.
Whoa.
And his name's Fred Schmid. And what Fred did when he was 80 was he did the Leadville 100. And he finished in under 12 hours and got his belt buckle.
Wow.
And then at 81, he had a bit of a stomach bug. And he finished in like 12 hours and 50 minutes or 13 hours or something. And he was pissed that he didn't get that belt buckle. And I like that. Wow. The fact that he was angry at 81, he expected to do the Leadville 100 in under 12 hours. Because I'm 54 and I doubt I could do the Leadville 100 in under 12 hours.
Yeah. Jeez.
So if that doesn't inspire people, man, he's one of the most inspirational people. And he started riding a bike in his 70s.
Wow.
He was a rancher.
Yeah, that's super inspirational. Well, what would you say, based on the folks you've worked with and observed over the years, what is a skill that separates the pros from those who might just consider themselves advanced or even expert riders? I mean, it almost sounds like you're suggesting that it's mindset as much as anything else, but is that right? Or is it a certain skill?
No, it's 100% mindset. It's 100% mindset. And there's one other skill. And I swear, I don't think anyone ever taught this to Greg Minnaar, but Greg just never looks down. And if you watch, it's really great for those listening, even if you're not a quote downhill racer or don't even think of downhilling as mountain biking. It is mountain biking. It's just a different maybe form of the way you do it. If you go to YouTube or redbull.tv, you can find all these World Cup downhill races. And one thing you'll find is Greg Minnaar, Aaron Gwin, all those guys, they flat out, they never glance down in a race run. And when they do, which I've caught a few of them doing, I caught Aaron Gwin doing it once. Aaron immediately crashed right after he looked down. And another time right after he looks down, he makes a big mistake and almost throws away a victory. But they just, those eyes are up. They're looking ahead where they want to go, using probably all the techniques I teach, even though I don't know if anyone ever taught them those techniques. Some people seem to be just born knowing certain things,
Yeah.
And, but it's mindset, and speaking of Aaron Gwin, those that don't know Aaron Gwin, he's the second winningest mountain biker in the professional downhill World Cup mountain biker, second winningest in the world with a much shorter career than Greg Minnaar so far. And one thing that Aaron Gwin did that completely changed downhill racing, and everyone that was around in the original era of Aaron Gwin when he started to become great will tell you this. He's the first downhiller to truly train like a professional athlete. I mean, a lot of downhillers dislike him for this because according to Greg Minnaar and Finn Martin, who was a photographer and former pro downhiller, World Cup racing was a rolling party. They'd roll in on Wednesday and from Wednesday through Sunday, they were out partying every night till 2 a.m,
Yeah.
And then Aaron Gwin comes along and the party's ended because if you were out partying, you weren't beating Aaron Gwin.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And so, and that comes from mindset. Aaron Gwynn's mindset is, I want to freaking win. I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. And he was the first one to really, G Atherton, somewhat the same way, probably. G's always been a monster, but G still loved to drink and party with them. So, the mindset, and what's also, as I mentioned with Greg Minnaar, the best people tend to have smaller egos. Again, not on the race course. They have big egos on race day. You need to have a big ego if you want to win a World Cup on race day. But off of the racetrack, they tend to have open minds because, again, they're looking for any edge they can get. Mm-hmm. And if somebody comes up to Aaron Gwin and said, hey, Aaron, I noticed this was, you were doing this, I'm willing to bet Aaron would sit there and listen, even though Aaron has no idea who that human is. Because Aaron's like, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm going to listen to this guy, because, I'd love to be a 1 second faster in a 2 minute downhill. Mm-hmm. Those are the main things. It's that mindset. Oh, and lastly, I got to bring this up in mountain biking. I hope all mountain bikers understand this. Joe Friel in the Mountain Biker's Bible wrote this years ago. Mm-hmm. And he wrote that something, I don't know the exact number, but I believe it was 99% or 95% of the people that hire me to coach them have no chance of making it as a pro. Mm-hmm. And a little less in downhill, but I think it's pretty much the same now. Like Aaron Gwin, I'll tell you a story about him in a second to back this up. He's a genetic freak. Just like every World Cup cross-country racer is a genetic freak. If you won the lottery tomorrow, hired the same guy's coach, hired a nutritionist, trained as hard as that guy, mm-hmm. if you don't have the lung capacity that guy has or the heart that guy has, you're probably not going to make it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and but that doesn't mean you can't get the same skill as Aaron Gwin or the same skill as Greg Minnaar, or Rachel Atherton. You can get their skill. You just might not ever have the physical body and lungs and heart they possess. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Because, mm-hmm. I was at this race in Fontana it's outside of LA, and I was pushing my bike up this paved road towards the start because I didn't want to wait for the shuttle. And while pushing my, 40-ish pound downhill bike up this hill, I'm anaerobic right now. Like, I'm breathing so hard, right? Just pushing my bike up this hill. It's a steep hill. Aaron Gwin comes by on his downhill bike, pedaling, and he's got a road cassette in the back. His smallest gear in the back, his biggest gear in the back was like a 20, know? And he just pedals right by me, and he's not even breathing hard. And then the guy in front of me, who was also pushing his bike, knew Aaron and said, hey, Aaron, how you doing? Uh-huh. And Aaron stopped and had a 2-minute conversation while pedaling. He never stopped. So now he's doing like 3 RPM. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And he's just having a conversation with this dude for a minute or two. Jeez. And then he goes, good luck today. And then he just pedaled away. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I was like, he must have the biggest, I think if he trained in a different way, he might, and enjoyed that kind of suffering, I think he could compete in the Tour de France. You know what I mean? Like he's got that kind of genetic, and Greg Minnaar is the same way. Greg's body looks very similar to mine. Like he doesn't have like a 6-pack abs or, he's not ripped like Aaron Gwin or G Atherton. Mm-hmm. But that guy, I'm breathing again. My heart rate's at its close to max and he's not even breathing. He's just talking like I am to you right now. And I'm about to puke, So there is some genetics, but that's not an excuse why you can't make it in the sport class or why you can't do, or why you can't become better. Mm-hmm. You can still become very, very good at this sport. And, you just might not ever be a World Cup champion. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Well, one of the skills that we've talked about is cornering, and that's definitely something a lot of us want to improve.
I want to ask you not so much about skills, but in your experience, are some tires better than others at cornering?
Well, definitely. Speaking of Greg Minnaar, and I'm going to mispronounce his tire just a second. It's named after a South African spear. Greg's from South Africa. It's called the Asahi, and I probably just totally butchered it.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. The Maxxis tire.
But okay, but it's a Maxxis tire, and it's phenomenal. Another tire, the tire I love to run, and I'm not sponsored by Maxxis. It just happens to be the tire I run. I wish I was sponsored by Maxxis, but is I run a 29 by 3.0 DHF with 15 PSI in it.
Wow. That's interesting. I'm surprised you run such a wide tire.
Why are you surprised at that?
I don't know. It seems like a lot of people who've been riding for a while that have tried it, just it's too wide for them. They feel like the sidewalls are a little floppy and that it's maybe not as precise as something a little bit less wide.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but this whole precise thing kind of cracks me up. Because seriously, I mean, if you're so precise that you're hitting a line that's 2 inches wide, like literally, like if you were a half inch to the right or half inch to the left, you're missing your line.
Yeah.
You've got way better vision skills than me. That's pretty amazing to hit lines that small. And all I know is with 15 PSI on a tire that big, my confidence goes through the roof. And I don't think there's much that'll help you more than having more confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And the traction that tire delivers it's unparalleled, because I mean, it's just amazing to me, and I'm going to say this, I really struggle with this when I like brag about something I've done to not sound like it's, I'm trying to brag, and when I'm really just trying to teach somebody a lesson.
Right.
So in 2002, I showed up to the World Masters Championships in Bromont, Quebec, with these tires called Nokian Gazzelottis. They were the first 3-inch wide tires, and everybody joked me about my slow rolling giant tires. Right? Seriously, every single competitor joked me. And then when I got second place in that race, all my competitors accused me of cheating with my 3-inch wide tires.
Right.
And I'm like, make up your mind. Was I cheating? or and it's funny because, the same thing, believe me, I'm very polite. I caught somebody the other day. I was having the run of my life, and I caught somebody the other day walking their dog. And I just shut it down and said hi and started to talk to them. But because there is no racing right now, Strava is my little racing, and in Moab, it's a big swinging contest, with all our locals here. Not all the locals, most of them have opted out of the swinging contest. But, it's just nice to see how you stack up. And it's nice I do it mostly to push my own limits. But, I seem to be doing pretty good with my 3.0 tire on the Strava segments here in Moab, especially for a 54-year-old dude. So the fact is it works, and it works really well. And I think like I read how Richie Rude tried the 3.0 tire and he didn't like it. And I read the article, and I have great respect for Richie Rude. And from the article I read, he tried it for a day, maybe 2 days.
Yeah.
Change just feels weird. Change feels weird as heck.
Right.
I think if he gave it a week, he might be like, oh my gosh, because that big tire, when I'm in the corner and there's a 2-inch tall root, my tire is still touching dirt. You're 2.5 with 20 some pounds of pressure. It's on top of the root. The only thing that tire is touching at the moment is the root.
Right.
My tire is still touching the dirt, and same with all the little pebbles out there. My tire is surrounding that little pebble and touching the dirt on all the sides of that little pebble, whereas a 2.5 tire is on top of that rock and just sliding along on top of that little pebble.
Right.
So I'm a huge fan of plus size tires. They're probably not going to win a cross country race, but as far as cornering traction, my gosh, they've got great traction.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, another thing I want to ask you about is how mountain bike skills training has changed over the past 2 decades. What about like in terms of the techniques and the skills? Has that changed? Are there things that you were teaching, maybe 20, even 25 years ago that are no longer being taught because they were wrong or just because skills have evolved? Have there been big changes like that?
There's been just a few. The biggest change was when I first started Better Ride, I still thought we were supposed to get our weight back. And I quickly learned that that's not true. Mm-hmm. Our weight should be centered over our pedals. And then there was that hinged body position I told you about that I learned from Nathan Rennie, and then Aaron Gwin kind of perfected. Mm-hmm. And that's not just for downhill racers. That's for a cross country racer. That's for a recreational rider. That's just going to put you in a much more neutral position where you can react to the terrain a lot better. Mm-hmm. And then for younger, more aggressive, not younger, I hate to use that word because I'm 54 and I'm using this stuff. And I know some people older than me that use this stuff. But for more aggressive riders, there's a lot more bump jumping, which is a skill where you purposely hit like a tree root or a small rock. Uh-huh. You purposely hit it actually rather hard. So it'll pop you into the air and you float over the next 8 or 10 rocks or tree roots or 20, right. And that has become much, much more popular. And I used to be one of the smoothest, or try to be, one of the smoothest riders. But I stuck to the ground and stayed as smooth as I could, if that makes sense to you, Yeah.
I mean, it's generally faster, right? Like, I mean, especially if you're talking about downhill, like you don't want to be airing out the big jumps. You want to just kind of hug them, right?
Well, yes and no. So I originally learned this from Miles Rockwell one day in Vermont. I followed him out of the start gate. In practice, and about 40 seconds into the run, I'm still on his butt, and I'm like, cool, I'm hanging with one of the best riders in the world.
Yeah.
And in my eyes, he was being playful. We're in the woods in Vermont and it's really rocky. Mm-hmm. And he hits a little rock and he pops up off that rock and, does a little baby air. And the second he lands, he does it again. Mm-hmm. And then the second he lands, he does it the third time. And I can't tell you what happened next because I never saw him the rest of that ride.
Yeah.
Because he just dropped me.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me that what he was doing, I was way smoother than he was on the rocks he was bump jumping. He was smashing into those rocks. Mm-hmm. But then he was barely getting airborne. Mm-hmm. And he was missing the next 8 or 10 rocks, which is a little smoother than being as smooth as you can, but still hitting those rocks.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's when I learned this concept of bump jumping. Right. And
is that something that was maybe were the bikes holding us back from doing that? Like, is it easier now to, do a bump jump
was in 1990. This was in 1995. It's actually, if I really want to think about it, it might be almost harder to do a bump jump now because you don't get as much of a bump off of a 29-inch wheel as you get off a 26-inch wheel.
Right. But suspension, I would think, right? You have a little bit of preload, like you can, I don't know, use that kind of to your advantage.
Yes. And back then, I mean, this was not actually, I said 95, I think it was 1996. By then we did have full suspension bikes. They weren't particularly good compared to today's bikes, but the suspension wasn't bad. But you're right. Some of that, but I think a lot of it is people's first bikes have suspension now. So they look at the trail. I call it looking at the trail with fully rigid eyes. My first mountain bike was a fully rigid mountain bike. I learned to go around everything and pick good lines.
Right.
Well, those good lines we used to pick are kind of stupid on a good full suspension bike. You know, it's better to go over those,
Yeah. That's so funny you say that too, because I know a lot of older riders, middle-aged folks like me, we like to tell the younger people, oh, you should learn to ride on a hardtail. And the only reason we say that is because that's how we did. And we think that's the only way to learn. But like you said, it can introduce maybe some bad habits even.
Well, yeah, I don't want to know if I want to call it a bad habit, but as far as efficiency, it's a bad habit. Like a thing I teach to racers, and I teach this less. Some people, like my friend Sasha here in Moab, he loves to pop off every little hit on the trail. And if you watched him and watched me, I think most people say, it looks like Sasha's having more fun than you do, right? Because my stoke is going as fast as I can. That puts me in the zone.
Yeah.
Right. But his stoke is hitting every little jump and being playful and very creative in his line choice.
Yeah.
Right. So, but if your focus is on speed, I had this awesome teammate years ago named Ryan Sutton. And Ryan told me, he said, Gene, don't take the smooth line fast. Take the fast line smooth. Right.
Yeah.
So that often means, especially as you mentioned, on a full suspension bike, the fast line is often going straight over all those roots as smooth as we can do it versus going around all those tree roots. Right? That's the more efficient and faster line. Which is more fun is up to the rider. And I'm not going to tell you which is more fun. And, because no, seriously, it's different for all of us, and as one of my former coaches used to say, or says all the time now when I see his Facebook and Instagram posts, remember, the number one goal is to have fun.
Yeah.
So that's changed. And then, the biggest thing that's changed for me, though, is as you mentioned in the written question here, I think you might have left it out of your oral question a second ago, is my delivery.
Yeah. With the internet now and videos, I mean, is in person still the way to do it?
Oh, no, that's funny. I read delivery differently than that. I do think with coaching, the one problem with coaching, I'm certainly doing a lot more of it. I've got a cornering tutorial that'll come out in my next newsletter that's online on YouTube, my YouTube page also. The one big problem with that is you can't ask that video questions and that video can't watch you.
Right.
So those are two pretty big things to do in person, but and another problem is, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when there was no internet, and when the internet came about, one of the coolest things that the internet was going to do was to help people learn remotely.
Right.
But the problem is there's no qualification to post on YouTube. So
there'd be a lot less stuff on there if there were.
Yeah. Right. So, a lot of stuff on YouTube is very well meaning, but isn't a good explanation of the actual skill. There's a lot of bunny hop tutorials that I tell my students to turn off the sound and watch what the guy's doing or the gal is doing, because they can bunny hop extremely well. But they're explaining doing something that they're not doing. If you really listen to what they say they're doing and then watch their body, they're doing totally different things. So they're struggling. And again, they're well-meaning. I don't want to. That's why I'm not going to mention names or anything, because all these people are trying to help others, which I have great respect for. But some of them do a better job explaining it than others. But what I meant by delivery was how one explains something.
Right.
So one of the biggest ways I've learned how to explain things better is when my student says, a student to me will say, when you say this, do you mean this? And then they say it in a more descriptive way than I was saying it. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm going to steal that,
Let me write this down real quick.
Yeah, exactly. Let me write that down, because that is a better way of explaining this than the way I was explaining it.
Yeah.
And even though maybe I'm a slow learner, but even though I've been coaching, including snowboarding, for basically my entire adult life, it seems like for over 30 years, including snowboarding, I still find that every now and then one of my students will have a better way of explaining what I've been trying to explain for 20 years better than the way I explain it.
Yeah. Yeah. Constantly learning.
Yeah. So, so I would say the overall takeaway from my courses is not much different than it was 22 years ago when I started, because other than the two skills we mentioned earlier, not much has really changed. But the way I explain things has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, because the whole goal of a coach is not, we touched on this earlier. It's not to fill the student's head with knowledge. Mm-hmm. It's to get the student performing in a better way.
Right.
You know what I mean? The knowledge is just there to help people buy into why they're doing this certain thing and whatnot, because in general, I've found the more cerebral someone is, the more they have to buy into it before they'll commit to doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Well, you mentioned this, but in 2019, which was not even 2 years ago, you came in first in the Masters 50 to 54 category at the U.S. National Downhill Race. So I want to know from you, like, what are your tips for staying fast and fit, at your age or at any age?
I already told you, plus size tires.
The tires just get bigger, when you're in your 80s, you're going to be on a fat bike.
Exactly. No, I got to credit that tire. And for once, it's funny. At that race, everyone was looking at my front tire and going, "Damn, that thing looks awesome." I think people understood. It's like, you got a motorcycle tire, It's right. Like that. But honestly, I think Ned Overend would be a better person to talk about this. I'll give a couple hints because I'm honestly not that fit. And that's why another reason I kind of wrote that article about mountain biking wrecking your health is I've had a lot of issues over the last few years or the last 10 years, I'd say, that have really held me back. And so one thing I've been preaching recently, I had it done for the second time a month ago. I went through all 10 of the Rolfing sessions with an amazing Rolfer. And speaking of the myofascia and all the stuff I've talked about earlier, my body moves with so much more grace and so much more ease right now, thanks to that Rolfing session or those 10 Rolfing sessions. Mm-hmm. And he pretty much got rid of my asthma because I clench my stomach so tight when I talk or do almost anything that my diaphragm can't move when I breathe. And he opened up my psoas muscles, and he opened up my diaphragm, and he's given me things to do to keep relaxed. Mm-hmm. And part of Rolfing, and this is going to gross a lot of people out, and it grossed me out, is he realigns your nasal passages, basically, which means he sticks his pinky up your nose.
Oh, wow. It's like a COVID test.
Yeah. And he cleared out my right nostril. I kept almost sneezing, and you can imagine sneezing with someone's finger in your nose is probably pretty dangerous. Mm-hmm. So he had to give up on my right nostril, and he only got about halfway up it. Oh, wow. But he got up my left nostril, and I can't tell you how much better I'm breathing right now.
Oh, wow.
It's beyond belief. I texted him on Monday. I'm like, "Hey, Felix, I can't believe how great my body's working, and I'm breathing so much better. I want to come in for another session and see if we can get the right nostril open like the left nostril." Wow. It's like the one piece I'm missing. Yeah. But because I couldn't believe it, because I basically took three weeks off from riding when he was going, because I went through all 10 sessions in 3 weeks, which is really fast, and most Rolfers wouldn't recommend doing that, but it was the only way I could fit it into my schedule. And after those 3 weeks, I went out and got some of my personal best times on trails.
Wow.
And I could tell that I wasn't as fit, but I could also tell I was breathing better, and my legs were moving with just turning those pedals over. They were like all the muscles that I should be using to pedal my bike were being used. Like I wasn't overusing one muscle and maybe not using another muscle. I just couldn't, like my whole pedal stroke just felt graceful and just ease. Like there was no resistance to my pedal stroke. And I'm still a little blown away by that. And then the last thing for older people, though, in addition to staying mobile, is one of my favorite expressions is, we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing.
Yeah.
So you just got to keep at it, man. And that does mean injury management. Like my latest article is about you need to ride on the offense, and you do want to ride on the offense. You never want to ride defensively, but that doesn't mean you have to be hair on fire. I'm going to get the Strava KOM offense. It can be like, I'm going to be as smooth as I can, which often when you focus on that, you'll be as fast as you've ever gone, even though that wasn't your focus. But, your focus can be still on the offense. I'm going to be as smooth as I can. I'm going to ride in as much control as I can. But, you've got to get out there and ride, because at our age, fitness, I don't know when it was. I want to say 6 years ago, I broke 4 ribs and chipped a vertebrae. Oh, wow. Going about 1 mile an hour in a switchback. Probably the worst wreck I've ever had. And I was going 1 mile an hour. Wow. And it's because I wasn't warmed up yet, but that's a different story. But anyway, that took 6 or 8 weeks to even be able to ride the bike down the street to recover from.
Yeah.
And I was an invalid, like a 30-foot climb, like a climb from a parking lot to the upper parking lot.
Oh, man.
Would destroy me after that. And I was in tears on the trail thinking, I'm never going to get back to where I was. And it took a full year to get back to where I was after that injury physically. So we've got to keep playing. And I learned this, speaking of Ned Overend, I learned this from Ned in some interview with him, probably in Velo News 10 years ago or so. It was when he was in his early 50s and he was winning Xterra races, at the pro level, not in his age group, but the pro level. Unbelievable. And he said that he needs a lot more recovery and that he doesn't need base miles anymore. So what he did was he just went out 3 days a week for an hour and a half to 2 hours at race pace. And then the rest of his time was recovery.
Yeah.
And I do feel I need a lot more recovery now than I used to.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a combination of things too that you mentioned earlier, doing yoga and different strength training and all of those things, that it's not just one thing, or it's definitely not just going out and riding a bunch and, riding even more to become faster. It's really kind of breaking it down and focusing on all the parts that add up to a faster and a better ride.
You nailed it. It's that balance. You've got to have that balance.
Yeah. Well, so one other question I wanted to ask you is, do you think that today's bikes make it easier for riders to go faster or to have more fun, which a lot of us want to do? And how much of the our performance comes down to the bike, and how much of it comes down to us as riders?
Okay, I'll start with our bikes better today and more fun.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, they're so much better.
Yeah. they're not just a little better. They're a lot better.
Not just a little. I mean, they're so much better. My friends and I call them super bikes. I mean, the bikes nowadays are insane. When I'm coaching people, and especially if there's an older person in the course who maybe has been riding as long as I have, and some younger people, I try to tell them about mountain biking in the 90s. And I think you remember this too. We used to say, if you're not bleeding, it wasn't a good ride.
Right.
And we used to endo probably every other bike ride. I would endo once, because our bikes were way too short for us. Our stems were way too long. Our head angles were way too steep. And that just put us in the let's endo position.
Right. Yeah.
And, and we had 26-inch wheels. I mean, 29-inch wheels and 27.5, they just roll over things easier. And you add that with our modern geometry, and bikes they're safer and they're faster. It's unbelievable how much better. And now with the steep, at least for tall people, I'm not sure if this affects shorter people as much, but for tall people like me, the steep seat tube angles, I'm finally my butt's not over my rear axle.
Right.
And I'm not riding a recumbent. I used to ride, basically it felt like riding I didn't know it felt like riding a recumbent because I had nothing to compare it to. But when I got my first 77 or 78 degree seat tube bike, I destroyed all my climbing, record, my personal PRs, which are like not even the top 50% on most climbs here in Moab. But I'd started just destroying my climbing times, and I wasn't any fitter. It was just I'm pedaling straight down now instead of pedaling forward.
Right.
So everything's better about these new bikes.
Yeah. Well, so does that mean though that then it's easier for new riders? I mean, can they just hop on a bike and instantly be good at it? I mean, I assume we still have a lot to learn in terms of becoming more capable ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's much easier. Like you're going to still develop the same bad habits if you try to teach yourself how to ride, probably, that we all developed on our crappier bikes. You'll probably crash a lot less, at least while you're learning, though.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's like these bikes are just easier to ride. They're just flat out easier to ride. I mean, my current bike is the best climbing bike I've ever owned, yet in a downhill race, if I had that, I'm talking about the bike I ride all the time, which is by today's standard would be called an enduro bike. In that bike, if I had that bike in the 90s, I think I would have been world champion downhill racer. Just because the bike is just, I mean, not because I had the skill to be world champion, just because it'd be like racing taking an Indy car to an electric go-kart race or something like, I mean, it's just like so much, the bikes are so much better. And the one thing though, I do want to stress about this that scares the heck out of me, because these bikes are so much better, it allows us to go much, much faster. And so for usually when I ride the rockier trails here in Moab, like Captain Ahab or Porcupine Rim, and I really want to go out and hammer, like if I'm riding with a group of friends, I often just have my regular cross country type helmet on. But when I want to hammer those trails, I put that full face on now, and my elbow pads, because basically I'm doing a downhill race now. And in the 90s, we all had our body armor on when we raced downhill. And now we're going the same speeds, greater speeds.
Yeah.
But we're also tired because we're not taking the chairlift up. We're doing we're riding, and it's like, so the one scary things about these bikes is they can kind of put us in a position maybe we're not quite ready for yet. But then on the flip side, if you make a big mistake, these bikes are much easier, much more forgiving, and you can recover from that big mistake a lot easier nowadays too.
Right. Interesting.
Modern bikes they're just a wonder to me. Yeah. They're just amazing. Here's the deal still, though. It's still 90% rider. You put Rachel Atherton or Aaron Gwynn on a trail bike, and they'll still whip me even if I was on a downhill bike.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm pretty good at downhilling, but I'm not Aaron Gwynn or Rachel Atherton good. So, you could put them on a much less bike than I have, and they would they'd definitely still beat me.
Right.
And that's even more so in cross country. You put Chloe on a 30-pound, $1,500 bike, and she would still crush me if I was on an 18-pound cross country race bike.
Right.
Yeah. So the bikes, but the bikes do, they make the self-learning curve a little safer. You're still going to probably learn bad habits, but those bad habits aren't as dangerous as the bad habits used to be. And they're just kind of safer to ride.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It is hard to separate sort of the bike from the rider. And like you said, we could think of examples of, someone who's a really good rider being able to do, really pretty well on an average bike, or, an average rider doing really well on a good bike. So it is hard to separate the two.
Definitely.
So Gene, what's next for you? What are you hoping to accomplish in 2021?
Well, the biggest thing is becoming a father and a husband to my family that's currently trapped in South Africa. And I haven't seen them. Haven't seen them in 13 months.
Oh, geez.
So,
yeah, that's super tough.
Yeah, it's been tough, But mountain bike wise, I've been working on producing a lot of excellent instructional video content for the riders who can't make it to my courses. And so, yeah, I just really want to expand my YouTube channel and keep on learning and becoming better at coaching. And I mean, I can't believe that I've made a living coaching mountain biking for 22 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Who would have thought? I mean, especially back then when
right?
that really wasn't even a thing.
Oh, man, when I started, the resistance I got, I'm encouraging my my fiance, Ilsa, who's also the Better Ride operations manager. I'm encouraging her to see if she can dig up some stuff from MTBR. MTBR, when I first started, I had no money, so it was my only way to market was I'd go on MTBR and just comment. Like, you know, people would say, how do I get better at cornering? And I'd give advice. And then I'd mention my courses. And you would not believe the people that attacked my mother. They attacked the idea of coaching. You can't teach people this. Everyone has their own style. No one can teach this. You know, you're an idiot. I mean, you would not believe the resistance I got. It was mind blowing. And I'm like, okay, you know, you don't like coaching, you know, you don't have to be coached, like, but you don't need to attack my mom. I mean, literally, I remember this one guy from Durango saying that my mom must have been a bitch or something. I was just like, really? You know, I was just like, are you kidding me?
A lot of resistance to that idea of bringing like formalized coaching and instruction to mountain bike skills.
Yeah, I was, you know, maybe it's because I come from snowboarding and ski racing. I mean, I was never a ski racer, but that's where snowboard racing got its first coaches and everything from. And that's just a very structured environment.
Yeah.
So I just figured, you know, I literally thought when I started Better Ride, I was going to be so busy from day one, I wouldn't know what to do with myself, you know? And it was nothing like that. You know, I ended up having to have odd jobs for 5 years. And, you know, like I really, until 2005, which is really the first 6 years, I struggled. I mean, I was living below poverty level, you know, but yeah, it's great to see that it's really caught on now. And you can really see the difference sometimes. Like at Whistler, I was coaching someone at Whistler 2 years ago before COVID, in 2019. And I'm like, oh, look, here comes a group of students. Watch, they're all going to be doing this wrong, and this wrong. And they came through, and I was wrong. They were doing the three things I said.
Yeah,
they were doing nearly perfectly. And I'm like, wow, this is so awesome for the sport.
Yeah,
you know, like I couldn't believe how good these people had become. You know, and I'm like, you know, so there is hope.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, you mentioned that you're doing some more of the video and online content, but it also looks like you've got a number of in-person clinics happening this year all around the U.S. and a lot of them are already sold out.
Yeah, you know, I've been, like I said, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm really fortunate that, especially thanks to the great help I have from Ilsa with my, she's taken over the social media and a lot of the marketing stuff for me. And with her help and just my reputation over the last 22 years, most of my courses do sell out. So again, I mean, I just feel really fortunate to do what I love for a living.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I literally pinch myself often. And whenever I'm tired or, you know, like don't want to do something, I'm like, dude, you're getting paid to do what you love.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, awesome. You know, get off your high horse and go out and do what you love and do it to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, your enthusiasm and your stoke definitely comes through, and yes, how you talk about it and present it. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, thank you, man. This has been a lot of fun, and it's gone a lot longer than I think both of us expected.
Right. It has. Yeah. So we'll have to do this as a 2-parter, but yeah, really appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. I thank you. I'm honored to be on your podcast. I feel I'm flattered.
Thanks. Well, you can connect with Gene and his team and also find out about clinics that are happening at betterride.net. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.